The proposal that was never meant to be. The train slowed as it entered the final station, its metal frame groaning like something reluctant to arrive. Elena Morozova sat upright long before it stopped, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, as if loosening them might allow doubt to seep in. Across from her, Lena pressed her nose to the glass, watching unfamiliar buildings slide past in shades of gray and gold. "This is it, Mama?" Lena asked quietly. Elena nodded. "Yes, this is where our new life begins." She said the words carefully, like lines memorized from a script she dared not forget. For months, she had exchanged letters with Charles Whitmore, a widower, he had claimed, a man of stability and intention. His handwriting had been elegant, his promises even more so. He wrote of companionship, of providing a safe home for Elena and her daughter, of mutual respect rather than romance. It had not sounded like love, but it had sounded dependable. After years of surviving alone, dependable had felt like salvation. The train doors opened with a sharp hiss. Elena adjusted Lena's scarf, smoothing it twice, then stepped onto the platform with the posture of someone determined not to appear lost. She carried only one suitcase. Everything else they owned had already been sold to finance this journey. Charles Whitmore stood, waiting beneath the station clock. He was taller than she expected, dressed in a tailored coat that seemed untouched by weather or worry. Beside him stood a woman in ivory gloves, her expression composed, yet faintly amused, like someone attending a performance she had already judged. Elena approached, offering a polite smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. His gaze moved over her, not meeting her eyes at first, but cataloging details. The worn edges of her coat, the repaired handle of her suitcase, the child clutching her hand. "You arrived sooner than anticipated," he replied. His tone held neither warmth nor hostility, only calculation. "This is my daughter, Lena." Lena gave a small, brave nod. The woman beside him stepped forward. "Margaret Whitmore," she said, though the emphasis suggested possession rather than introduction. "Charles's sister." Her eyes lingered on Elena's clothing, then shifted to the suitcase, then back again. The pause was deliberate enough to be insulting. "You traveled with only that." Elena answered evenly. "We brought what mattered." Margaret's smile did not reach her eyes. "How poetic." Charles cleared his throat, as though eager to regain control of the moment. "Perhaps we should discuss arrangements before proceeding further," he said. "There are considerations." The word struck Elena as oddly formal. She had expected discomfort, perhaps even awkwardness. She had not expected hesitation. They moved to a nearby, sitting area inside the station cafe. Charles remained standing. Margaret did not sit either. Elena realized, slowly, that this was not a welcome. It was an evaluation. "I was under the impression," Charles began, "that your circumstances were modest." "They are," Elena replied. Margaret let out a soft laugh. "Charles, modest is not the word. You describe her as self-sufficient. This is not self-sufficiency. This is charity waiting to happen." Elena felt Lena's fingers tighten around hers. "I did not come for charity," Elena said. "Your letters made that clear." Charles shifted, discomfort flickering across his face. "Yes, well, letters are one thing. Practical realities are another." Elena understood then, not all at once, but in a steady, sinking clarity. This was not about compatibility. This was about value. "You believed," Margaret continued, "that marriage would elevate you. But my brother requires a partner who enhances his household, not one who must be rescued." Elena looked directly at Charles. "And you agree?" He did not answer immediately. That silence told her everything. "I think," he finally said, "it would be unwise to proceed." The words were spoken gently, almost apologetically, but they carried the finality of a locked door. Lena spoke before Elena could respond. "We came a long way," she said, her voice small but steady. Margaret glanced at the child with faint irritation. "And you will return, I assume." Elena rose. "No," she said. "We will not return." Charles seemed surprised. "You have somewhere to stay?" Elena lifted her suitcase. "We will find somewhere." There was nothing dramatic in her tone. No anger. No pleading. Just a quiet severing. Margaret looked faintly relieved. Charles looked faintly ashamed. Neither tried to stop her. Outside, the afternoon wind had grown sharper. The station behind them hummed with movement, indifferent to what had just happened. Lena walked beside her in silence for several steps. "Mama," she asked finally, "did we do something wrong?" Elena paused, kneeling so they were eye level. "No," she said. "Sometimes people decide they cannot keep their promises. That is not the same as us failing." Lena considered this, then nodded, trusting her completely. Elena stood again, though she had no destination in mind. The city stretched unfamiliar and vast before them. She felt fear, yes, but beneath it, something steadier. She had not been abandoned. She had been spared. As they walked away from the life that had rejected them, neither of them noticed the man across the street watching quietly from the doorway of a modest workshop. A man who had learned long ago what broken promises looked like, and who recognized, in Elena's posture, someone carrying the same invisible weight. Their paths had not yet crossed, but they would. A different kind of house. By evening, the cold had settled into Elena's bones. The city that had seemed vast in daylight now felt unwelcoming, its streets narrowing into unfamiliar corridors of stone and shadow. She had spent the afternoon asking careful questions, exchanging polite words with strangers who had no reason to care. Each inquiry led to another address, another refusal, another reminder that survival required more than dignity. Lena did not complain. She walked beside her mother with determined patience. Though her steps had grown slower, her small hand increasingly heavy in Elena's own. When they reached the edge of the commercial district, the buildings changed. Storefront glass gave way to workshops with wooden signs, their windows glowing with the steady light of labor rather than wealth. The scent of sawdust drifted into the street, warm and oddly comforting. Elena paused outside one such place. A modest sign read, "Hail and Son Carpentry." Inside, shelves were lined with unfinished chairs, tables, and door frames. Nothing was ornate. Every piece carried the quiet evidence of use. Solid, functional, built to last rather than impress. The man she had noticed earlier stepped into view from the back room, wiping his hands with a cloth. Up close, he appeared older than she first thought, his hair threaded with gray, his expression composed but attentive. "You look like you've been walking for hours," he said, not unkindly. Elena straightened. "I apologize if we're intruding. I was told someone here might know of a boarding room." The man studied her, then glanced at Lena, who stood close but unafraid. "There's a room above the workshop," he said. "It's not fancy, but it's clean." Elena hesitated. "We can pay once I find work." "That can be arranged," he replied. "I prefer payment in effort anyway." He extended a hand. "Richard Hale, Elena Morozova, and this is my daughter." Richard nodded, as if the introduction were sufficient explanation for everything else. Before Elena could respond further, another figure appeared in the doorway behind him. Younger, taller, his presence carried a restrained alertness. His gaze moved quickly from Elena to Lena, then to the single suitcase resting at their feet. "Who are they?" he asked. "My guests," Richard said simply. The younger man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're not running a boarding house." "No," Richard replied. "We're offering a room." A silence followed, not hostile, but weighted with unspoken history. "Elena," Richard continued, ignoring the tension, "this is my son, Daniel." Daniel gave a brief nod. It was neither welcoming nor rude. It was cautious. Elena recognized that caution. She had lived inside it herself. "I understand if this is inconvenient," she said. "We won't stay longer than necessary." Daniel met her eyes then, as if measuring the truth of that statement. Whatever he saw did not soften him, but it did quiet his objections. "The stairs are in the back," he said. "Watch the third step. It sticks." It was not kindness, but it was not refusal either. The room above the workshop was small, with a narrow bed, a wooden table, and a single window overlooking the street. Yet it carried something Elena had not felt since arriving in this country. Stability. Lena walked to the window and looked down at the lamplight below. "It smells like trees," she said. Elena allowed herself a faint smile. "That's because things are built here, not just bought." Later that evening, Richard invited them to share supper downstairs. The meal was simple: bread, soup, and tea, but it was eaten without ceremony, without judgment. Daniel spoke little. He listened, though. Elena noticed how he paid attention to details. The way Lena held her spoon, the way Elena thanked Richard before taking anything. His silence did not feel empty. It felt guarded. "You're looking for work?" Richard asked. "Yes." "You've sewn that coat yourself," he observed, "and repaired the stitching twice." Elena glanced down, surprised. "I use them in clothing. And keep accounts." Richard nodded. "Skills are useful. We restore furniture here. Precision matters more than strength." Daniel looked up. "You're offering her a job now?" "I'm offering her a chance," Richard replied. "Same as anyone else who walks through that door willing to work." Daniel leaned back, studying Elena again. "People usually leave," he said, "once something better comes along." The statement was blunt, but not directed solely at her. Elena answered just as plainly. Then they were never looking for something real. Their eyes held for a moment, an understanding passing between two strangers who both knew what abandonment looked like. Richard rose, collecting the empty bowls. "Work starts early," he said. "If you're staying, you'll earn your keep." Elena stood as well. "Thank you for treating us fairly." Richard shook his head. "Fairness isn't generosity. It's just doing things properly." As Elena and Lena returned upstairs, the sounds of the workshop settling for the night echoed below. The closing of drawers, the careful placement of tools, the ordinary rituals of people who repaired what was broken instead of discarding it. In the quiet of the unfamiliar room, Elena realized something unexpected. She had arrived here by accident, but for the first time since stepping off that train, she did not feel like she was waiting to be sent away. Downstairs, Daniel remained seated long after Richard extinguished the lights, staring at the chair Elena had used, as though trying to decide whether trust was something that could be built or only lost. He had not yet reached an answer. What remains when no one leaves? Morning in the workshop began before sunrise. Elena learned quickly that Richard Hale measured time not by clocks, but by habit. The kettle boiled at the same moment each day. The doors opened at precisely the first line of light. Tools were lifted, used, and returned to their places with the care of objects that had earned respect rather than ownership. She found comfort in that rhythm. Work, unlike promises, did not pretend to be something it wasn't. At first, Daniel spoke to her only when necessary. His instructions were clear, concise, and stripped of anything resembling conversation. Hold the frame steady. Measure twice. Don't force the joint. It weakens the wood. Elena followed each direction without argument. She understood that competence was the only language he trusted. Days became weeks. Chairs were repaired. Tables regained their balance. Broken things returned to usefulness beneath their combined effort. Lena spent afternoons drawing at the corner desk Richard had built for her, occasionally handing Daniel sketches of houses with uneven roofs and very determined-looking windows. Daniel never praised them, but he never discarded them either. He placed each drawing carefully inside a drawer. It was Lena who crossed boundaries first. "Why do you fix old things?" she asked him one afternoon, "when new ones are easier?" Daniel sanded the edge of a cabinet before answering. "Because new doesn't mean better." She considered this. "Mama says people are like that too." Daniel's hand paused briefly before continuing his work. Elena noticed the moment, but said nothing. Trust, she had learned, could not be rushed. It had to grow in silence. One evening, as they prepared to close the shop, a letter arrived. Richard handed it to Elena without comment. The envelope bore an address she recognized immediately. Whitmore. The name alone tightened something in her chest, though not with longing. Daniel saw the reaction. "You don't have to read it here," he said. "I'd rather not carry it upstairs," Elena replied. She opened the letter carefully. Charles Whitmore's handwriting remained as polished as ever, each word arranged with the same calculated elegance. He wrote of reconsideration, of misunderstandings, of how circumstances had changed. His previous engagement, it seemed, had failed. He now wished to renew their arrangement, assuring her that he could overlook the difficulties he had once found unacceptable. Elena read the final line twice. Security, after all, is what we both wanted. She folded the letter slowly. Richard waited. Daniel did not pretend disinterest. He believed stability is something he can offer now, Elena said at last. Daniel let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Stability wasn't the problem before. No, she agreed. Honesty was. Richard leaned against the workbench. What will you do? Elena looked around the workshop. The worn floorboards, the repaired furniture, Lena's drawings tucked into corners, the quiet evidence of effort shared rather than purchased. This place, she said carefully, was not offered to me as rescue. I was asked to work, to contribute, to stay only if I chose to. Daniel met her gaze, wary but listening. He offered marriage as if it were a transaction, she continued. You offered chair to sit in and tools to use. Only one of those felt like respect. The silence that followed was not uncertain. It was understanding. Elena walked to the small stove where kindling had been set aside for the next morning. Without ceremony, she placed the letter inside and struck a match. The paper curled quickly, ink dissolving into ash. Lena watched from the doorway. Are we staying? She asked. Elena smiled faintly. Yes. Daniel did not speak, but something in his posture shifted. Not relaxation, not relief, but the release of an expectation he had carried too long. People usually leave, he said quietly. Elena met his eyes. Only when they believe something better exists elsewhere. And you don't. She glanced around the workshop again. Better isn't always louder. Sometimes it's just consistent. Richard gave a satisfied nod and returned to locking the cabinets, as though the matter required no further discussion. Outside, the evening settled into its usual calm. Nothing dramatic marked the decision. No declarations. No promises spoken aloud. Just the absence of departure. Yet as Daniel extinguished the last lamp, he found himself aware of something unfamiliar. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. And that, he realized, was far more unsettling. Upstairs, Elena unpacked the final items from her suitcase, placing them into drawers she had not expected to use for long. For the first time since arriving in this country, she allowed herself to arrange their belongings not as a visitor, but as someone who intended to remain. Below her, Daniel stood alone in the quiet workshop, studying the repaired table they had finished together that morning. It was stronger where it had once been broken. He ran his hand across the surface, thoughtful. Some things he was beginning to understand did not weaken after being damaged. Some things held better. He just didn't know yet whether people could be repaired the same way. The shape of what was built. Spring arrived without announcement. It came in the form of softer light through the workshop windows, in the scent of thawing earth carried in on-work boots, and in the slow return of customers who no longer hurried past the Hale shop, but stepped inside with familiarity. The season did not transform the town overnight. It simply revealed what had been waiting beneath the cold. Elena found herself waking earlier than necessary, listening to the sounds below before joining them. The scrape of a chair, the steady rhythm of Richard preparing coffee, the measured silence that meant Daniel was already working. She had learned those sounds the way one learns a language, gradually, then all at once. Nothing about their life together had been declared permanent. Yet permanence showed itself in repetition, in shared tasks, in the absence of endings. One morning, a delivery arrived. Planks of oak ordered for a commission Daniel had accepted weeks earlier. The project was larger than usual, a dining table meant to seat 8. Elaborate, Elena observed, running her hand along the grain. Daniel shrugged. The client wanted something that lasts. Richard glanced at him. Most people do. They just don't know how to ask for it. The three of them worked side by side, measuring, cutting, fitting each piece with care. There was no wasted motion, no raised voices. Even their disagreements were practical, focused on angles and balance rather than authority. Lena claimed a corner of the workshop as her own, arranging her drawings across the wall with deliberate order. Over time, her pictures had changed. The earliest ones showed only 2 figures standing beside a narrow house. Now, there were 4 figures, the structure broader, its lines steadier. Daniel noticed the addition of a second tall figure, but said nothing. By late afternoon, clouds gathered unexpectedly, dark and heavy with rain. A sudden storm rolled across the town, sharp wind rattling shutters and sending pedestrians rushing for shelter. Inside the workshop, they continued working. "Hold that joint," Daniel instructed as thunder cracked overhead. Elena steadied the wood while he secured it into place. The force of the storm seemed to press against the building, but inside, their focus did not waver. The table began to take shape between them, legs anchored, surface aligned, structure firm. Richard stepped back to examine it. "Strong," he said. "It'll outlive whoever bought it." The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like a challenge. For a moment, all 3 of them simply listened. "It's strange," Elena said quietly. "A year ago, I thought security meant never facing storms." Daniel adjusted a clamp. "Storms aren't the problem. It's whether anything holds when they come." She met his gaze. "And this does." He considered the question longer than necessary. "Yes," he said finally, "because no one here is pretending." The answer settled between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, but honest. Richard wiped his hands and moved toward the stove. "You don't build something to avoid weather," he added. "You build it to stand through it." The storm passed as abruptly as it had arrived. Sunlight returned, striking the damp streets and turning them briefly gold. The workshop doors stood open, letting in the scent of rain-washed air. They carried the finished table to the center of the room. It was simple, solid, unadorned. Elena ran her hand across its surface, remembering another table she had once imagined sitting at, a polished one in a stranger's home, chosen for appearance rather than purpose. That life had promised comfort without belonging. This one offered belonging without promises. Lena climbed onto a chair, inspecting the work with solemn approval. "It's big," she said. "For many people." Daniel looked at her. "Or for the right ones." Richard gave a low chuckle. "Then we'd better make sure it gets used properly." That evening, instead of delivering the table immediately, they left it where it stood. 4 plates were set upon it. No ceremony marked the decision. No one suggested it aloud. They simply sat. Outside, the town carried on in its ordinary way, unaware that anything significant had occurred inside the modest carpentry shop. Elena realized, as she watched Lena speaking animatedly to Richard while Daniel listened with quiet attention, that nothing about this life resembled the one she had traveled so far to find. This one had not been arranged. It had been built, and like everything else they repaired or created within those walls, it remained unfinished. Not fragile, not temporary, but still growing, still requiring care. Daniel rose after the meal, already considering adjustments to the table's design before delivery. "There's room to reinforce the base," he said. "It could be stronger." Elena smiled faintly. "You're not finished with it yet?" He shook his head. "The important things rarely are." The lamps were extinguished one by one, the workshop settling into evening once more. Outside, the last light lingered on the sign above the door. Hail and Sun Carpentry. Inside, however, the space had come to hold more than the name suggested. And though none of them spoke it, each understood the same truth. What they had chosen to build together was only just beginning.